Today we have a very special guest joining us, Tara Christie. Tara is the president and CEO of Banyan Gold, where she's also on the board of directors. Tara has over 20 years of experience in the exploration and mining business, including working with First Nation development corporations. Tara is also the president of Every Student, Every Day, a charitable organization that works to improve attendance in the Yukon schools. Thanks again for joining us on The Rocks. Let's dive in. Well, Tara, thank you so much for coming on The Rocks tonight, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Cheers.
Cheers. Happy St. Pat's.
Yeah, so what are you drinking?
Well, I'm drinking a Fort Barron's dry Riesling. It's actually a really nice sunny afternoon, and this is one of my favorite summer drinks to end the workday on a summer day and relax.
Perfect. I'm sticking with my St. Patrick's Day theme by drinking coffee because it's been one of those days. I still need a coffee for and with Bailey's Irish Cream, which of course now in the era of Zoom, you could really have in your coffee on lots of telephone calls and meetings and nobody would ever know.
Well, they might slow down a little bit. It depends on how important your meetings are and how fast paced.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Zoom-based meetings, I know you were at PDAC last week as well. What did you think of PDAC being virtual for the first time? How was it?
We had a booth in a core shack, and we did the one-on-one meetings with the Precious Summit. There was lots of interest in the one-on-one meetings at the Precious Summit. Part of the PDAC, that part was really well done. The booth and the core shack, I think we have a ways to go before people really buy into that. And, PDAC isn't as much as an investor show as a trades, a geology, a students, networking and having fun. And that's just not the same virtual. Actually the social parts of the PDAC and even the sharing between the geologists really isn't the same. I think it made me really look forward to the next time we get to have an in-person conference like that.
Absolutely. It made me miss previous PDACs and be excited for next year. Yeah, because this year I was doing it as prospector. So same thing, we had a booth and we were a sponsor, but so I didn't attend the one-on-one meetings because those were for investors, right? It was for investor pitches. So it was a different feel than when I've been sitting on the investor side because you didn't have the one-on-one connection as easily. But at least they did it. I would have hated for us to go a whole year without a PDAC.
Well, and we all want to support the organization. So, we went into it thinking we're doing this to support PDAC because they do so much on the advocacy side. We didn't go into it thinking that we had to get something out of this show. Even the volumes of people was far less than you would ever get at the show. I don't know how successful you thought it was for Prospector, but
it was successful in that when we were able to get a hold of people, we've had a lot of great follow-up meetings and demos. I think the nature of the platform made it a little bit more challenging to do that. But once we got people, we got great success out of it. I think I had a harder time than I would have in person attending some of the technical talks, because that's usually my one time a year where I get to really listen in on some really cool geology that is outside of my skill set and my focus and really learn from that. And that was, I'll be honest, it was a little harder to pay attention when I was doing it over Zoom than sitting there in person.
Well, and it's so distracting. You're home, you've got your multitasking, the phone's ringing, you can't turn it off because you're in a conference room. And I found I wanted to listen to a few talks and I missed them simply because I got busy doing something else and the inevitable.
But a big theme was certainly, COVID's impact on the industry and its impact looking forward. And one thing I really admired about what you all have been able to do over the last year is you've kept pushing on, right? I mean, despite all of these constraints, you've been out in the field, you've been doing great work.
Well, that was the other dilemma for PDAC as we were launching our drill program. We sent our crews out in the field in late February, and we're drilling now. That really distracted us. Normally at PDAC, I'm not worrying about that for a little while, but it's pretty unique to be drilling again. And the sell-off in the market right now is a little bit, the juniors or gold stories are not appreciated at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that'll come back, and we'll have some results.
For folks who may not know what that means, what does that mean that cold stories aren't appreciated right now?
Well, you just need to look at all of the junior gold companies, and they've all come down from even what their prices were in December.
Mhm.
There's been all this attention to Bitcoin, and despite kind of what I think is the prevailing macroeconomic trends, and yet I'm sure there's a lot of draw into a lot of these other investments that are hitting the news. They say there's record savings in Canada and many places across the world because people have been home.
Yeah.
And where is that investment money going, or is it purely in savings? We've seen it in the U.S. with some of the Reddit and everything, but
Mhm.
that money hasn't flowed into the precious metals junior stocks yet.
And there's such an interesting story there where even when gold prices go up, gold companies don't always track, right? With the gold, which I know for a lot of folks, when I talk to them about why they should get into the industry as an investor, makes no sense to them. They're like, well, why doesn't it, if you're talking about how little production there is coming on the market, why aren't we seeing prices driven up? Do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Well, there's a whole host of reasons that, say for a junior exploration company, we're a long way from production. So today's direct price probably doesn't reflect what our share price should be anyway. We would take some time to actually get to a resource, PEA, permit, and then develop and build. So it's
Mhm.
always leveraged to the price of the gold. But, even some of the large producers aren't being appreciated, and they've got some pretty significant cash flows at this gold price, 1730 something or other. It's still a pretty healthy gold price compared to what the costs are for these mines. So they're going to be making lots of cash. So I think there's a little bit of a disconnect even with some of the producers where the price of gold should directly track.
Yeah.
It's going to be their cash flow going to show it.
No, I think that's an important distinction for folks listening, that the earlier stage projects, that there isn't necessarily that direct connection because there's so much time and work that still has to come before they're producing. I think is something that maybe isn't clearly understood outside of the sector. And I think so much of it is also goes back to this big theme that I hear, that people are still nervous about investing in any kind of mining. And, to me it's kind of crazy because people will invest in Bitcoin or technology companies where I'm like, do you know who understands how Bitcoin works? I've listened to so many presentations and like I still can't wrap my mind around it. And this is like a tangible thing that we're doing that's used by all these different industries, and yet it's so scary to people.
A Bitcoin's kind of scary to me, the amount of money that's locked up where people have forgotten their passwords or some key person has died, and all of a sudden that money is just, I think it'll be interesting, to look and see how much money not evaporated, but is locked up.
Well, and we had on our last episode, we had some questions come in from the folks who were watching our live on the rocks about the environmental impact of mining Bitcoin, right? And that the carbon footprint, because of the electricity that's required for the server farms, is astronomical. And we had Nick LePen on, who does, great work for the Visual Capitalist. And I was like, you've got to do a story showing this. Like, what is the environmental impact of real mining versus Bitcoin mining? Because I think it would really surprise people.
Oh, that's a great idea. And they do such great work. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, right. I'm like, I want to know those numbers. Yeah. Well, I thought too, you're working in the Yukon. You've worked in the Yukon for a long time, right? That's a good part of your career has been spent up there. What's it like to work in the Yukon? Because I think folks in the US think of that like the gold mining TV shows, the reality shows, right? And it's like totally in the middle of nowhere, off the grid. Is that what it's really like working up there with Banyan?
Well, we're pretty fortunate. We have a main highway that goes right between our two deposits. We have a power line right there, and we even have cell phone service. So
Mhm.
definitely not remote. We are subject to the shorter days in the winter and the colder weather. But as I said earlier, we started our exploration program in February, and so that's a pretty limited cold part of the winter. It's certainly, what's exciting about the gold rush stories and the overall gold rush is we still haven't found the source of all that gold.
Mm.
There's been a few really interesting deposits, but the Yukon's so underexplored for, I think it's going to become a very exciting district for exploration. New mines coming on, Victoria Gold and Alexico. That's really exciting. It shows you can actually permit a project in the Yukon, and they're pretty close to existing towns and infrastructure. We don't know what's further out still. There's a lot that's still to be discovered in the Yukon, and that's really what excites me. I'm a treasure hunter,
Yeah.
at heart, and an explorationist, and the thrill of getting out there and figuring something out, and developing a model and then testing it, and that gets me going every spring. It's like
Yeah.
a hook.
Yeah. You're headed out on a new adventure every year.
Every year, days are getting longer in the spring, and it's time to get out to work.
That's awesome. And what I love about what you all are doing is you do have these other companies that are out there with you, right? In proximity, really close to the projects that you all have. You collaborate with these other companies in a lot of ways, right? And share information about what you're finding and what you're doing, which I also think is an aspect of our industry that surprises some people. They would perceive those other companies to be your competitor and would maybe in a different industry think, no way would I tell them or talk to them about what we're doing and kind of get them on board with our vision. But I know that's a big part of what you talk about with Banyan.
One is a big part of how we ended up with our Ormac property.
Mm.
When I became the CEO, we started with one project down in Watson Lake, which was then our flagship. And I knew about this other property up in the Mayo area, right beside Alexico and Victoria, non-core to both of them. And so that's where the relationship began, because in optioning that property, they're not going to option it to somebody they don't trust. If you're working
Mm.
in their neighborhood, right beside them with their First Nation, where your community reputation matters, you want to be really careful who you get involved with. And that's really blossomed into a bigger alliance for us, because they're our big shareholders. They have a vested financial interest in us doing well. They're also potentially competitors for our ultimate project, which is down the road. Right now, we've got this great relationship. Or pre-COVID, it was a little bit easier to do things like share geologists or core cutters, and they let us use their facilities so that we didn't have to put in our own camp, which lessened our footprint and made our dollars go further. But when you're beside the two largest mines that have geologists that know more about the district than anybody else, having that ability to tap into their brains and run ideas and see what they see, or their data crosses over onto along the property boundary, but they think about what goes on across the property
On the
boundary.
other side.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a really great relationship, and this thinking about having them in your corner, when there's meetings or discussions about everything from policy to even self-isolation policy for COVID, we were
Oh,
really able to benefit from what Victoria Gold already did. We followed their lead and then scaled it down to what we could do. And that meant, we started drilling in June, and touch wood, we haven't had any COVID cases, and throughout, we drilled all the way to December, moved our crews, but it really was because of that information that they had developed that we were able to do that.
and maybe talk a little bit, Tara, about how do I think it's a little unique in mining where you have a junior that has shareholders that are larger companies. I maybe explain that and how, why that model works, how that happens. I think that's pretty rare looking at other industries to have that happen.
It is rare. It's normally the larger mining companies that make the strategic investments. You see that in the Yukon, Newmont, Agnico, they've all made, 10 and up to 19.9 investments in several different juniors. But for us, we thought that would be too early for us because, yeah, we are trying to get this to the scale where one of those companies might be interested. But if you have that large of a shareholder and you have one of those major companies too early, it can actually kind of stagnate your ability to get your market cap up.
Mm.
The original way that Alexico and Victoria became shareholders was we issued shares from the original property agreement. But concurrently with that, they both also invested equity. So it's a two-way street, and they've participated pro rata in all of our financings based on, they see it as investing in our future, our technical teams, and what we found. It's been very successful. So they want to maintain their interest in that because they get the upside as well. Yeah, but it is a bit unique. There aren't a lot of mining companies in the Yukon though, and they could only, because they're not big mines yet, they have to be pretty strategic. They couldn't invest a little bit in everybody like a Nico or a Newmont could.
Yeah, and then what does that mean for Banyan in terms of a not necessarily an exit strategy, but the path that you take with the company when you have shareholders like that in your shareholder base?
Well, I think it gives us increased optionality over, like, I think a lot of companies also get stranded if they are seen purely as a takeover target. Well, we've got the optionality of being able to take this all the way similar to what Victoria Gold did because of our relationship. And you'd strengthen and change the management team to the different stages. But I'm comfortable getting this company all the way through building this resource, whether it's a PEA, pre-feasibility study, starting permitting. Our relationships and with both of those companies that have done that
Mhm.
certainly gives us the advantage of being able to envision that's a potential outcome for Banyan as well. But I also have three competitors right in my share registry that it's a little bit of competition. I got to get it big enough before one of them, but they're also going to be a check and balance. I've got not one of them's going to walk away with the company without the other ones thinking it was a fair value.
Yeah.
So it is unique, and it both puts pressure on me, but it also gives me great optionality for our shareholders. And I'm a big shareholder, so I care.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's also something that, when I talk about investing in mining, people are surprised at, is the focus that we put on management having a share of the company, and the amount of shares that you have really shows how committed you are to the company, right?
Absolutely. And I'm about a 5% shareholder. And even in this last year, in financings between my husband and I, we put in over $350,000. So that's more than double my salary in 1 year.
Yeah.
And I'm not the first CEO. So I had to buy all my shares either in financings or in the market because I was the third CEO of this company.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
I wasn't the founding CEO.
Well, I think that's just again those for an investor looking at a pitch deck, they might flip through that and see that on a slide and like what does that really matter, right? To have a certain percentage of management ownership, but it really is a differentiator in the mining space.
Oh, absolutely. And I look at the price right now versus what my last investment was at 28 cents. We're down to 17, 18 cents at the current time. And I'm still pretty confident in my investment. So I think that gives some shareholders, and they can tell if I sell because I said he reported, if management is weathering this, it's related to the global price of stocks, not about individual stocks right now.
No, and I think, yeah, that commitment really shows through in the ways that companies deal with a whole host of issues. And I know when I first talked to you, one of your first few slides that I saw was talking about your First Nations relationships and, the priority you put on that and your approach to that, which when I was listening to it was a huge differentiator and the specificity that you had in terms of why you were doing what you're doing, which I would imagine is also part of why you guys will be really, really successful.
And that it's such an important part, and it's been so important with COVID too, to have had those existing relationships. I started my first working with First Nations, whether it was training programs or, and all across Canada's north, including the Yukon and even Ontario, over 25 years ago. So
Mm.
that's a long time. And with Banyan, it was one of the things that we started with right from the start. As soon as I became CEO, it was a top priority to make those relationships and the relationship first, and then mentoring businesses, making sure you're being collaborative, hiring. There's a whole broad range of that. And then of course my charity, which I'm very passionate about, Every Student Every Day, which is Victoria Gold, and a big part of that. That has been, we've given out over $1 million to every Yukon community, First Nation in the last 9 years. Like that's tremendous power. And I must say we're getting some more support from other mining companies as well. But really, it's been driven by Victoria Gold and Banyan. We just accepted applications for our next intake. We've got $150,000, and Friday was the deadline for applications, and we have more than double that in applications. So clearly, there's a need, and we're filling a need.
And every student, every day, the priority there or the focus is increasing school participation, right? And how did you come on that as a key issue for the community?
Well, we found attendance rates. You've got a huge percentage of kids in the Yukon that are missing. Well, the average at the time was around 53% attendance. So there's a huge number of kids across the Yukon which are missing school. And you can't, ultimately the long-term goal is to get well-educated kids that can be part of the jobs which we in the industry are providing for the future. But the very first step is to figure out the systemic issues that are preventing them from getting to school. You can't say teachers, you got to teach, why aren't we getting better outcomes if the kids aren't even getting to school? So it all goes together, but the start is let's get the kids to school and give the teachers a chance to actually teach them. and deal with the community and the societal issues that are preventing them. We've already got kids that are working at Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine, which have benefited from the money which we've been raising and giving out to schools. So we started with a really long-term vision, and we're actually pretty excited that we're already seeing results. And 9 years in, that's a pretty good success rate.
That's really exciting. And what were some of the issues that you all have been able to help with? Like when people send in applications or schools send in applications for support, what are they looking to help with? Is it transportation? Is it connectivity?
Connectivity is a huge issue, and connectivity between First Nations and school, home and school. And one of the unique things about us is we're not top down. We provide broad categories, but the other real benefit is that we want projects to be community led and driven. So each community has to look within themselves in their own school and understand which students they can affect the greatest, or they think that they have a potential solution for, and then design a project around that. And the real benefit of that is that you get the community champions, you get passion and volunteers, and all that added just adds more value than the dollars do. And you're also focusing it on those unique kids. So we have 5 general categories of projects, and we like startup projects, and we've been pretty flexible in it. And it's great to see First Nations actually taking they're focusing on their own youth and saying, okay, this is our group. This is what we're going to do to, one, to monitor it, and then find solutions where there's solutions that are needed.
There's so many lessons that can be gained from that, especially for people in the mining industry with when you enter a community, really asking the community and understanding what they need and want, right? In terms of with this company coming in, what can the company do to contribute and be a good corporate citizen in that community, as opposed to this is our CSR strategy. Here are the 5 projects you can pick from, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's a key mistake, because things don't work if you come with a cookie cutter from Vancouver to apply it in a community. They kind of look at you and think you're the emperor's wearing no clothes. So I think it is a good model. Listen and then let them decide what they need.
No, that's fascinating. And are you seeing, with the attention you pay to those issues and your involvement, are you seeing that approach more commonly with your mining colleagues, or do you think the industry has a ways to go on that?
I think the industry, I'm closely aligned with Alexco and Victoria, and they lead in a lot of that as well. And this last year, we really haven't seen a whole lot of other people. So
Mm.
I don't really know what's been going on with other companies. And, if you have those existing relationships, you can at least pick up the phone and call people and have a frank conversation. So I think if you weren't a company that had those existing relationships, it would be very difficult through this last year. Industry wide, I think we're getting better, absolutely. And you see that in lots of successful First Nation development corps across the country, which are really, starting to have some really creative and successful businesses.
Yeah, and what is a First Nation Development Corp for those who aren't familiar with it?
Sure. Well, in the Yukon in particular, we have self-governing First Nations. So they have settled land claims. It's not like in Ontario where, you still have, or BC where you don't have clarity over land ownership. And so there's a clear agreement. And as part of that, most of those settled First Nations took some of the money that they had and put it into economic development. So the First Nation collectively owns it, and they invest in businesses. Some of them are hotels. So, actually in the Yukon, they're a major owner of the hotels, the airline in the Yukon Air North,
Mm.
as well as some mining businesses. So they've got an interest in a catering company. Some are involved with contractors. So, and it allows them both to make money for the development corp. It allows them to train and hire people within the community, but also they need employees beyond First Nation communities.
Mm.
So it is changing the corporate culture in the Yukon, and I guess all across Canada, really. We see it most in the Yukon, though, because that's where we were.
Yeah, of course. Well, and then with everything that's gone on in the last year, and the work that you're doing, another big theme we heard about at PDAC was this desire for more technology innovation, which, running an AI company, I love to hear, but then, I'm always interested to hear what that means to companies in different parts of the sector. Has all of this kind of facilitated or driven you to use different kinds of technology, or has it been maybe more like just back to basics over the last year? Have you seen any changes?
We're a little bit of both. I think that with technology, you can also have a little bit of a crutch where, your geologists aren't really, or your younger ones don't get that opportunity to really visualize, like structure, understand. The computer does it all for you.
Yeah.
Well, there is something to the good old drawing out a section and trying to figure out what you're seeing and not just using the computer software. But, in terms of technology, yeah, we're using, digital magnetic susceptibility because we think that's correlated with the gold. So that's using new technology. We're looking at a couple new geophysical techniques that might help us because of that, identify similar mineralization elsewhere on the property. LIDAR, that's been a really big development for everybody because of that great ability to get images, the ability to see structures, and then base, you're combining that with geophysics, your geochem, your geology, and then using that. It's a great tool. It seems expensive. Plus, you use it in permitting. You get better images. It has such broad heritage. Our heritage assessments are better because of LiDAR. So there's lots of technology, and that reduces the areas which have high potential. So there's a huge benefit in technology for what we're doing. And the fact that at our stage, we're already done our heritage assessments. We've already done a lot of this work is because of that technology. You wouldn't have done it. But I am a big proponent that young geologists need to know how to use a compass. Uh, Not just a GPS. You need to actually know the old school stuff. You need to actually occasionally draw a section and understand what's going on.
Yeah. No, because I think, going back to your analogy of being a treasure hunter, the way I see all of these amazing technologies is they help draw out the treasure map, right? They can really de-risk exploration by helping you identify top priority targets, but at some point you still got to go to the X. You got to find your way to the X,
And
right?
you
You
got to
can't
drill it.
you gotta drill it, and the truth machine has to come out. And so it's that fun combination to me of what you can do with technology on the front end, and then of course on the interpretation, right? And when we get your drill results and the amazing stuff you can do with building all those beautiful ore body slides that we see in presentation after presentation. But there's that critical piece where you're never going to replace having good geologists on the ground.
Yeah. Well, and the 3D modeling is so great too, and the, videography and things that you can do. That's been a big change in the industry and
Mm,
telling the story and helping other people that aren't geologists actually visualize what's going on. Now, my
right.
father is a structural geologist, and I have such huge respect for how he can visualize things without having to draw it, he just has that real spatial view. And
Yeah.
and we get that from lots of other things now, but it's a real skill of lots of the old school geologists, and I think we need to do more to make sure that our younger geologists get that.
I was talking to a colleague earlier today about some of the work that we did in Afghanistan, where we had all these Soviet era reports that the Afghan and Soviet geologists had done back in the 70s. But we knew, looking at the reports that had been saved when the Taliban came in, a lot of the Afghan geologists put their lives at risk to like bring these documents home to their house and like protect them. And so when we were going through and digitizing all of these, we knew that in many cases the Soviets wouldn't have allowed all of the results to be shared with their Afghan colleagues. And we weren't exactly sure which reports were truthful and which ones weren't. And so we were able to find a Russian American geologist who actually was able to reach out and make contact with some of the geologists who had worked in Afghanistan and got copies of their field notebooks, right? And like when you see these, it's like, I mean, the drawings and the comments, it's like a work of art, really, because back before all that, you had to capture everything, on paper when you're out wandering around. And it is an incredible skill to be able to do that and then bring it back and communicate to people what's going on. And we found that they were incredibly accurate. It was amazing when we went back to the field and validated their results, how accurate they were able to do with a notebook and some colored pencils.
Absolutely. That's pretty incredible. And it's the one thing that you might lose if somebody just very systematically is out there, bang, bang, photograph, measurement,
Yeah.
blah, blah, in my little unit, off I go, next one. And you might miss something really big because you didn't even know you were we're standing right beside it.
Yeah.
But that's been the story of the mining industry is lots of people have missed major deposits or drilled 50 meters short or, had traded one project for another because they needed to spend money on decide between two projects or they couldn't make an option payment.
Mhm.
That's part of the treasure hunting game is to make those decisions on priorities.
Yeah. Make sure it's not the one that got away, right? It's like that girlfriend or boyfriend that marries the next person after you, right? You're dating these deposits in a way. You're dating the work and make sure you pick the right one, right? Ask some good questions before you go forward or let one go.
Yeah, and sometimes you do have to let them go. There are lots of companies projects which have been around a long time, and
Mm.
yeah, maybe they're economic at these gold prices, but there's a lot that they sat around for a lot of years and weren't economic, and a few more drill holes probably isn't going to change that.
For an investor, how do you differentiate then between those projects? Because of course the marketing pitch is we just need two more drill holes, right? And we're going to prove that it's massive. Or, when you as an investor, because you are, how do you differentiate between the ones that maybe just do need a few more drill holes and the ones that are just going to keep going like that for another 10 years?
Well, in the absence of being able to know the geology, one is there a similar type mine with similar type grades right near them? That's a layman's person, and that's one advantage that we have with Victoria Gold. Same age mineralization, similar
Yeah.
grades. Theirs was economic. But the other big thing is the one we talked about earlier is insider ownership and
Mhm.
investing along the way. Is management actually continuing to invest in the
Mhm.
company alongside shareholders, or do they just get their position up front and they're kind of, getting their salary and that's all that really matters, the kind of lifestyle companies.
Yeah.
My dream is to work myself out of a job on this one. I'm in it for the long game, and but if somebody comes along, and it'll have to be a good offer because I've got quite a bit of time and money invested in it, and that'll be
Mhm.
good for my shareholders because my equity is pretty significant in the company.
Yeah, and your interest is completely aligned with theirs.
Yep.
So, what advice then would you give to someone starting out, maybe a young geologist looking at where they want to be in their career? Of course, it's all well and good to say, yeah, management, co investing, but how do you do that if you're a young person just starting out? You can't, in a lot of ways, it's hard to have essentially like a startup in the mining industry in that sense, right? Or how do you kind of get going on the path that you've managed to forge?
Well, so it's a little bit different, a young investor versus a young geologist. Yeah, a young geologist, I always say get the broadest experience you can, see as many projects as you can, ask lots of questions. That's really how you get experience. And then figure out what are the economic geology parts of it versus the academics. Like there's a lot of, and that's personal preference. If you want to be an academic, great. But if you want to be focused in the companies that are looking for deposits that are going to become mines, well, then you need
Mm-hmm.
to really start focusing on, what kind of grades, what kind of deposits they are, what kind, how they get mined, whether they're narrow or open pit, and
Yeah.
all those aspects of it. And I think one of the things that helps me in being a CEO is I've done, permitting, environmental assessment. I've done, land management and maintaining claims. I've run the camps and hired the
Yeah.
cooks and then been out in the field and collecting the soil samples. So, I've got a good idea of what all those jobs are and how it all comes together. And I think that's really important because lots of geos get quite pigeonholed early and then that's all they do. And that's their whole field of view. For an investor, it's there's a few good checkbooks like Marion Katsua's checklist management, property, jurisdiction, and I think jurisdiction is going to be more of a risk as we go forward in this crazy world that we've just lived through
Yeah.
this last year and see what some governments do with all this debt. But there's a few resources like that which are impartial to me or any other company, and I think hear somebody's pitch and then go back and look at that list and go and see if they do actually check the boxes in
Mm.
your view, or go and check back with somebody else in the industry about it because there are a lot of different mining companies and it is hard to make those decisions.
But I do think one of the neat things about mining is, especially for the juniors, like you can literally pick up the phone and talk to the CEO. And that's something else that's really unique. Like, I mean, you probably spend a lot of time on the phone
A
talking
lot
to
of time on
people.
the phone. Yep.
And it's very accessible, a lot more accessible, I think, than many other industries, certainly in the extractives. I have not seen that to be the case in oil and gas, for example, right? But mining companies really are very responsive, and you can call the number on the website and talk directly to the people making decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's actually the event that I was at this morning at the women's leadership panel for family offices. That was one of the main takeaways is that those investors would like to be directly connected to the CEO and have that opportunity to talk. So that's really good advice to, and that's what the PDAC would have done for us. Is the CEOs would have been all standing there waiting for people to come and chat to them. That's the one-on-one, in-person approach.
Well, and we're talking to a lot of family offices because we're finding that they're starting to open up in their interest into mining. And what differences have you seen or heard in terms of how they look at the industry as opposed to just retail investors or other groups you work with?
Well, certainly the ESG focus has been really, broad interest, not just the family offices, but all of the shareholders, but particularly them. I find lot more conversations about relationships with First Nations and all aspects of the G from, hiring and training to equity, pay equity and just good governance of companies. So I think that's something that we're seeing juniors particularly have to spend more time on. And because typically a lot of juniors haven't spent a lot of time on that. They say, oh, that's for the bigger companies. But I think that there's going to be a growing expectation that you're doing more sooner. And it doesn't necessarily need to be big cost because, it's the people investment and it's the understanding community, which is even more valuable. You can throw dollars around more easily with less effect than actually spending the time and connecting. So yeah, I think that's a really big change we're seeing. And I've noticed it this year in particular, despite COVID.
Yeah, I wonder if it heightened it in a lot of ways because now, there's more attention on what's going on in people's backyards or the potential impact of these events on global supply chains.
Potentially, but I also think these online events are attracting different investors. Lots of people are home. They wouldn't have necessarily come to a mining investment, but heck, this one's is virtual. Let me try this out. And so, a lot of people had participated in some of the recent online who'd never participated in them before. And so they're finding out stuff. So I think there's been a big shift and, that someday we'll go back to in person, but I think the virtual will continue and it has brought more people into investing, or at least in the mining space anyway, than we've seen before.
Well, and I was really amazed when I first started doing the virtual conferences last year at how many companies were out there that I didn't know about. I think what happens when you go in person, so much of your time is networking, which is what makes it fun, right? And more enjoyable. But you really do spend a good part of your time, catching up with the people and looking at the projects you're following, as opposed to some of these events, you get matched up with 30-minute sessions with people you've never met, projects you've never heard about. And for me, it really, really showed me that there's a lot more out there for opportunities than I was certainly tracking.
Well, that was the other interesting thing, especially these news people, is lots of people were asking about other projects. And, you become so involved in your own project, they want to ask you about, and I know Victoria Gold and Alexico, I get lots of questions about theirs and could almost probably give their presentations. But, even more broadly than that. So someday I want to sit on the other side where you were in the last conference and actually listen to all the stories as an investor. Because there's a lot to learn too from what other people are doing and saying, and it'd probably be less stressful than telling my own story 23 times in a day.
Yeah, exactly. Get to take a break. I know that's when I would do it for Prospector, I'd be like, actually, this time you're not going to pitch me. I'm going to show you something. So you can make a coffee and sit there and take a break for like 20 minutes, right? Because guys, it's one after the other. So you've got it down by now. I'm sure it's
Yep, can give it in my sleep, not even half awake. I will admit, I had one where I think the schedule actually changed overnight. So, I had like a 4:30 meeting. And so, I was up early and I logged in at 4. And oh my gosh, there was a guy there. It's like, I thought I was early, and I hadn't even brushed my hair.
oh
Thankfully,
yeah.
it was a bit. And it had changed. Like they moved into an earlier slot that I hadn't closed off.
Yeah.
So it was like, Oh, okay, I can
Oh,
do this.
cool.
I'm not quite ready. And
Okay.
yeah, okay. No makeup. That's all right.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember which one it was, but I also found it funny. It must have been Precious Metals Summit Europe because, here I am ready to thinking I'm going to be talking to companies in Europe. So you start at like 4 in the morning, and then my first like 5 meetings were all companies in Toronto or Vancouver.
Yeah, we could have done this at a better time.
Should we just exchange email and say we'll like do this tomorrow? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But again, you're all in it together at least, so you all feel the pain.
At least you concentrate the meetings into like a few days so then you can do work on other days.
True.
It's kind of one way to look at it.
Or do you have anything that you're really looking forward to in the next year now that hopefully things continue to be positive and start to open up more, that you're really looking forward to in 2021?
Oh, getting back on an airplane, traveling a little
Yeah.
bit, getting back to the Yukon, especially
Mhm.
for summer and to see our project and getting back to see the people in the community again, but feeling like I'm safe doing that is important because you need to reconnect, seeing my crew out there and actually reconnecting with the people I've never met that we've hired and have been working for me for years.
Yeah.
It's I'm looking forward to that. I am looking forward to a good old fashioned vacation somewhere nice, whether that's in an RV or preferably a beach someplace warm. But
Yeah. I have this weird thing where I miss, like, airport lounges, like, I just miss walking into the lounge, having a glass of wine and the free peanuts or whatever, and, like, knowing you're going somewhere. I'm like, I would just take that at this point. I don't even have to get on the plane. Just let me in the lounge. That's how desperate I am. I haven't been in the US for this long since 2005.
well, we were on a plane basically every week, right? So it's a big change. Even my 7-year-old asks when we're getting on a plane again and had a hard time being so stationary. So, but I miss good old fashioned entertaining, having people over for dinner and like conversations like this where we're actually at a bar and enjoying a drink and relaxing with some music, and that'll be nice.
Hopefully soon. Well, thank you so much for coming on the rocks, and I hope next time I see you, we're in a bar having a drink in person.
Yeah, you too. Well, thanks and
Cheers to
great
that.
to cheers to that.
Thank you to our guest and my colleague Tara Christie for joining us on this episode of On the Rocks. To learn more about Tara and Banyan Gold, visit banyangold.com and check them out on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. For more about Prospector, go to prospectorportal.com or check us out on Instagram at ProspectorAI and LinkedIn at ProspectorPortal. Thanks for joining us on the rocks. Until next time, keep your glasses full and your ice cold.